And it's now time for science and our first keynote address. And I said science. I didn't say computer science, since our first keynote speaker, Professor Luciano Floridi, according to his Wikipedia page or resume, is not a computer scientist. He's a philosopher, which is a different thing, right? Or is it? To quote Abelson, after all, computer science is not really about computers, just like biology is not about petri dishes or microscopes. So Luciano Floridi is a professor of philosophy and ethics of information at the University of Oxford, where he directs the Digital Ethics Lab in the Oxford Internet Institute. He has written several books on those topics, which have been translated in more than 15 languages. And he sits in or chairs a number of boards or groups, just to name a few, the EU Ethics Advisory Group on ethical dimensions of data protection, the Ethic Advisory Group on the right to be forgotten in some company named Google. Recently, the UK Parliamentary Commission on Technology Ethics. And he will talk to us today about the good web, some challenges and strategies to realize it. I think that nobody here will argue about the importance of those questions, especially nowadays. I also think that nobody will argue that the answers to those questions might be only technological. So I'll leave it to you to decide if that's computer science or philosophy or both. But in any case, I'm certain that we're up for a very insightful and enlightening keynote speech for our web conference. Please welcome Professor Luciano Floridi.
Thank you.
There you are. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful invitation. As we heard, it is an unusual position to be a philosopher among scientists, technologists, policymakers. But you also know that when things are getting a little bit more complicated and confused, perhaps a bit of philosophy does help. So my talk will be unashamedly philosophical, but also political. There will be a few bits that will be recognizable in terms of current technology and what's happening in the world. But mostly what I would like to do today is to invite everybody to dig a little bit more deeply in what is going on with our web at large, with our information society, what the problem is, and whether we can do something about it. So going straight to the introduction, I'll tell you more about the talk. This is what I like to talk in terms of the TTC predicament, the tale of two cities. Now, just to be clear, if you haven't heard about the tale of two cities, it means you're not one of the 200 million people who bought the book. It's one of the best sellers of all times. Now, if I hadn't told you that that is Dickens, if you had just read, as you probably are doing now, that text, you would have considered that a description of our time. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, and it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, darkness, hope, despair, everything before us, nothing before us, and so on. Why? Well, because Dickens is essentially describing a moment of transition. It's the French Revolution. Everything is changing. The old is no longer there. The new is not coming yet. And I think that that is exactly the kind of moment we are living in. I like to exaggerate. Allow me. It's never going to happen again in the history of humanity that we move from an entirely analog world to a world that is digital and increasingly digital. And so the idea here is that something deep is happening. The web is central part of that transformation. And this is what I would like to discuss today with you. There's something not quite right with the web at the moment. It's not inevitable, and it's not irrecoverable. But the web is a bit polluted. We know that. Whose problem is it? And what's the key to the problem, this pollution that we are sort of experiencing? And is there a solution? And looking forward, do we have a human project within which a good web makes sense? Well, since the map is going to help us as a menu, it will come back in a few slides. So if you get lost here and there, just bear with me, and the map will pop up again. But first of all, what the problem is. Well, I like to describe our society as the mangrove society. Now, if you do not know where the mangrove grows, well, the mangrove grow where in wonderful weather. You just have to look at the picture. When the river or sweet water meets the sea, the salty water. Now imagine you are there, scuba diving perhaps for a moment, dream with me, and someone asks you, oh, is the water salty or is it sweet? Well, the answer is that, my dear, you don't know where we are. This is the mangrove society. It's both sweet and salty. It's brackish water. So imagine someone asks you today, are you online or are you offline? My dear, you have no idea where you are. We're both. Of course, if you walk at any time, your mobile phone is sending information about your geolocation. We know that. I don't have to explain this to this audience. Or someone asks you, oh, is it analog, is it digital? Say, your kitchen. My dear, you have no idea about my kitchen either. Because, of course, it's analog and digital at the same time. So when we say both, we mean the mixture, the sort of a hybrid that comes with brackish water, hence the mangrove society. The mangrove society is a bit of a forest, it's sort of growing a little bit like a jungle, but that world is expanding. And again, no one should have any doubt, certainly not here, about how much that is expanding. Everybody is coming to the delta of the river, living in brackish water. 2.1 billion people on Facebook, that's where they live. 1.5 billion people on YouTube, that's where they live. And so anyone, for a moment, thinking, oh, but there are hundreds or millions of people who never made a telephone call. First, who doesn't know that? Second, of course, but their lives has been determined and is being determined by those who actually make that telephone call. So do not forget for a moment that not only everybody is going to brackish water, but those who are not in brackish water, well, their lives is being shaped by those who live there, where the river meets the sea. So within the society in which we live, well, our world has been slightly polluted at the moment. Lies, propaganda, doubt, imprecisions, exaggerations, half-truths, alternate truths, manipulation, etc. And of course, inevitably, the usual tweet from the President of the United States. All that has been polluting the world as we speak. Now, in that context, let me introduce an analogy with what happens when environments become unbearable. Well, there's something called extremophiles. Well, the extremophiles are strange animals. There's a picture of one of them there. I don't think it's cute. Some people think it is, but I think it's quite revolting, to be honest. They are polluting agents, like extremophiles, that are ruining the web, that are ruining the infosphere. Now, these animals live at the edge of social environments. No, the analogy. The harsher the conditions, the more they become the only organism fit to survive. So it's a good environment for the extremophiles to live in. Now, consider that it gets even slightly worse, because the real extremophile finds that particular environment. But the social extremophile, those are able to generate the toxic conditions under which they can live. And so not only they are the fittest in that environment, but they make that environment such that they are the only ones to survive. And if this sounds a little bit too sort of high level, well, here is a good example. Hillary Clinton adopts alien baby. Yeah. Sometimes you have to think that only on the other side of the Atlantic this can possibly fly. But, well, even for cynical people like myself, born in Rome, there is something deeply disturbing. Populism, for example, which is part of this extremophile way of polluting the web, it's not that it's supported by the fake news, for example. I mean, you don't convince people who are already on that side by giving them more rubbish. But by producing all that rubbish, that damage makes populism, for example, more feasible. So it's not that fake news convince people, but fake news ruin the environment within which then other things can really happen. Now, if that is the case, then inevitably we have a problem that is a bit of a self-reinforcing issue. The more you debate, for example, with people discussing fake news on the web or on Facebook or on Twitter, the more you add toxic conditions, the more the web becomes favorable to social extremophilia. So in a way, we almost have no weapons. Now, essentially, the more polluted the environment is, the more you do to make it less polluted, the more you increase chances that it gets even more polluted. It's like essentially debating with people who, shall we say, believe in AI. What can you do? I mean, you just have to leave them alone. Or singularity people, those kind of churches. Sometimes you have to resort to an old trick, Socrates and its irony. You make fun of them, but that doesn't clean the environment. So how can a healthy web be restored and maintained? We have one more problem. I told you, problems first, and then we'll see whether there's a solution. Here, the analogy is not with the extremophile in biology, but with antibiotics. Well, antibiotics are a great thing, but the only thing that they cannot fix is too much antibiotics. Antimicrobial resistance, AMR, is the ability of a microbe to resist the effects of medication previously used to treat them. Antibiotics don't work for everything. So democracy, it's a bit like an antibiotic. If something goes wrong in a country, the first thing we say, more democracy. And if something is not so much okay with a particular society, more democracy. And some institutions are really not doing their job, more democracy, more antibiotics. But what happens when a democracy is not working? More antibiotics? No, it's not working. And the more, the worse it gets. Any populism, and you must have seen what happened in Italy recently, where essentially you add more of that loose sense of democracy, it just gets worse. So I'd like to introduce here the idea of a democracy resistance. Mind, not democratic resistance, be careful. Democracy resistance, exactly like the antibiotics. A definition, the ability of a non-democratic society to resist the effects of democratic measures previously used to improve it. If you're not doing so well, you add, and at some point, your solution becomes part of the problem. Populism is an excessive amount of democracy that undermines democracy, exactly like the antibiotics. Well, if this is the case, then the web, the infosphere, the mangrove society in general have developed democracy resistance. We suffer from DR, and we need to find a way of getting out of this vicious circle. Remember, more appeal to more power to the same forces that are undermining our society is not a good idea. In short, more democracy can cure anything by itself. When democracy is not working, you need better democracy, which is really different from just more and more and more. You don't ask people for a referendum about Europe when you know that that referendum is the equivalent of a financial war, because we don't have referendum on war and taxation. If you do, you are foolish. You're called Cameron. You go home. You have more foolish people following you, and you are just destroying the legacy of a great nation. So you see, democracy can be really dangerous if you don't understand antibiotics. In that sense, I said, better democracy is not equivalent to more democracy. So that's the problem in which we are. The web is part of that, but whose problem is it? Say, okay, fine, well, not my problem, not my problem, so to speak. Well, not quite. Is it the individual's problem? Yes, it is. What I'm going to show you in a second is the World Happiness Report 2017. Things about caring, freedom, generosity, honesty, health, income, good governance. And as usual, green is good, red is bad. That's the way the world looks like for individuals. Individuals are affected by a bad web. A good web is good for those individuals. And the things I've just said don't make it that good. Or is it society's problem? A polluted web? Yes, of course it is. That's the Gini index, mostly inequality. Again, green, it's okay, red, not so okay. You see, slightly different distribution, but we can see what kind of expectations we may have. Or is it humanities at large? Not the individual, not a particular society, but all of us. Human Development Index, 2017, life, education, GDP per capita. Again, more green, the better, red, not so. Here is the outcome. And finally, you know what? Maybe it's not individual, it's society, humanity, but it's the whole planet. Happy Planet Index, 2006, environmental impact. Green, brown, that's the situation. So anyone you pick up, the individual, the society, humanity at large, the whole planet, a polluted environment, a polluted infosphere, a polluted web, it's bad for everybody. Meaning that it's everyone's problem, at all levels. So if that is where the problem lies, on the shoulders of everybody, what's the key to the problem? Here, I'm afraid I have to go back to some logical analysis. That is where I come from when I was a younger guy. I grew up as a logician. And I hope you will bear with me, because it's not complicated. It just requires a bit of patience. Part of the problem is a problem that's got to do with complexity. Now, we know that complexity normally means, I don't quite get it, it's so complicated. But we are shy. I don't meet people who normally say, oh, that's too complicated. I normally meet people who say, oh, that's very complex. It's so much more intellectually rewarding to describe something as complex as opposed to complicated. Complicated means you're not getting it. Complex, it is his problem. It's just a complex problem. Complicated, I'm not quite there. So I'm really talking about complexity here. I'm not talking about complicated. I'm not up to the task. Complexity concerns a system, its components, their relations, and process state spaces. Now, there are, as we know, so I'll be quick on this, because I know this is the right audience, there are many scientific concepts of complexity. So to the question, what is complexity, there are several answers. I'll give you 4, the standard 4, but there's a 5th, which is exactly the one we need in order to understand the key to the problem of a polluted web. The unified view looks like this. Of course, there is mangrove complexity, how complex it is to generate that particular system. Anyone in software development knows that pretty well. You have, once you have the system, the state complexity, how complex the particular system in question is in itself. Of course, you also have what is called sometimes programming complexity. How complex is the dynamics, internal dynamics of that system? Not just how the elements are combined together, but how they work together. And finally, the classic, the queen of all complexities, computational complexity. How complex it is for that particular system to solve a problem, which is just another way of saying that we have problems we understand in terms of the sort of resources required to solve them. Imagine having a catalog of animals in terms of the kind of food that they take. The kind of problems that require those resources are more or less complex, all the way to NP. Now, these 4 forms or theories or understandings of complexity are well trotted, well studied. We don't need to linger. There is one missing, though, or slightly missing. Coordination complexity. Normally, how many oxydones does it take to change a bulb? You know, one of those jokes. And, well, in that case, the joke actually, if you crack it in Oxford, goes, how many dons does it take to change a bulb? And the answer is, change. So in this particular case, since I need coordination complexity, I like to say that as the per picture, 2. So how many systems does it take to solve a particular problem? Because if a problem is such that, remember, like an animal that feeds on resources, if a problem requires a lot of systems to coordinate in order to be solved, then the complexity, the coordination complexity of that problem is very high. You have a car, it's not starting. It takes 3 people to push at the same time. Coordination complexity of the car pushing problem, 3. Clear. So how do we leverage this to understand what the web, the pollution, how are we getting there? Well, the coordination complexity, bear with me for a moment, is the number of kinds of interactions. Remember the 3 people pushing the car, the degrees of mutual influence, I push, you push, oh, 1, 2, 3, go, and dependency, all together now, and scope, the car, of the consequences within a network of systems. In other words, if you could put all those nodes together and push at the same time in a coordinated way, they would be able to solve what? That problem which requires those resources. But we want to look at this from the problem perspective. Now, if that's the case, we have a new challenge. There are problems that have maximum degree of coordination complexity, if and only if they are unsolvable without the mobilization of the whole network. So next time you have an email which says, please don't print this, save the forest, remember, that is useless. It's a joke. Because the coordination complexity of the environmental problem is such that saving that particular piece of paper is like being the individual who goes, push the car, and goes away. Anything helps? No. It's useless. It's the individual drops a glass of water in the desert. Every drop works? No. It's useless. Why? Because that is a high coordination complexity problem. And unless you reach the threshold of sufficient number of systems coordinated, that problem would not even be scratched. So the necessary condition for a problem that needs to be solved, communication. Unless the nodes talk to each other, there is no solution. A plausible requirement. The harder the problem, the more agents may be required to solve it. That seems to be quite understandable. What kind of agents? Biological and artificial. Welcome to AI. AI will be, if we do a good job, a magic, shall we say, force to solve some high coordination complexity problems. That's where we should be pushing. Other things, science fiction. Hypothesis, problems with high coordination complexity require human-machine communication and coordination. That seems to be quite obvious. So we're getting close to back to the problem. Now introduce all these little tools. The C factor, cooperation, collaboration, coordination, co-design. Well, the trouble is that in our society, we come from several centuries of fine-tuning of tools to coordinate through competition. It's called the market. Game theory is all about that. But we don't really have a robust mechanism to foster coordination independently of self-interest. Now that is a bit of a trouble, because you end up by having 1,000 people, all good wills, all trying to do the right thing, uncoordinated, and so normally the word that follows crime is organize. And the normal word that follows goodwill is hopeless. It's a coordination problem. The paradox of coordination complexity today is that because we live in an affluent society, the less individuals feel the need to coordinate their efforts. After all, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm going to have my car, my house, my job, my children. What's my problem? The problems, because it's a very advanced society, are coordination complex. The more individuals should coordinate their efforts, but the less they feel they should. So if you are poor in the middle of nowhere with a simple society, you coordinate, and yet the coordination complexity is not that high, you could actually do something equally well. If you live in a very rich society, oversimplifying, you should coordinate very much, but because it's a rich society, you don't feel the need. And therefore, sufficiently good locally is equally true, is not globally good enough. So at this point, I hope you are sufficiently worried, because I need to provide some kind of constructive solution. So how do we get out of this? We have these nasty animals. The web is polluted. Democracy sometimes undermines itself. The coordination complexity is a big issue. We don't know how to get out of that. What might be the solution? Well, the pollution of the web is part of a failure in the governance of the coordination complexity of our information societies. Now that I told you what that means, I hope the sentence comes as intuitive. Our society is so complex in the technical sense that needs a high degree of coordination. And yet it's exactly the society in which that coordination is not felt as a priority. You feel like you have the freedom and the leisure to vote for Donald Trump. You think it doesn't matter to complain against the government by voting for Brexit. After all, what's going to go wrong? I mean what I'm saying. So affluent societies that don't feel immediately the pain of saying, we better get this right. We better get this right together. Not so. But all this is not exactly an ethical problem. It's a problem of infra-ethics, or infrastructure, of the rules that make ethical decisions more likely. Something very similar to what happens in Not in My Backyard, for another talk. So the pollution of the web can be solved only by a governance of the web, understood as design, management, and care of this ethical infrastructure, or infra-ethics, that facilitates well-being of society with a high degree of coordination complexity. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful, but I hope we're getting there. Society, lots of complexity, coordination required, governance of the coordination. How? By design, the kind of rules that make good behavior more likely. It's not yet ethics, but it's what makes ethical behavior more likely. So infra-ethics is, and I don't need to explain the picture to the locals, infra-ethics is the infrastructure, and consists of things like neutrality, rule of law, security, transparency, and sometimes even privacy. We treat these things, take transparency, as if they were ethically good in themselves. They are not. Think of it for a moment, transparency. When you vote, your vote is secret, for a good reason. Zero transparency. Oh, so transparency is not such a good thing. Oh, it's a bad thing then. No, it depends on the infrastructure that we're putting in place. If we want to have a particular outcome, for example, freedom to vote whoever you want, then it has to be a high degree of opacity. If you want to know how your money has been spent by your politicians, well, maybe transparency is a good thing. But you can tell that it's a means to an end, is an infrastructure for the real business of ethics. So infra-ethics is the design of, or straightforward, the conditions that facilitate. Before, for the philosophers in the room, is a transcendental condition of possibility. I won't say that again. So the agents and their choices are okay, actions and their consequences are okay, states of systems are okay, and they develop or behave morally in a way that we like. Now that is what we need to work on. So governance of the complexity of the information society, the web included, is governance of the infra-ethics that makes it possible. So governance as a design, management, and maintenance of the right infra-ethics of a coordination complex social system. I do hope that I've been succeeded in developing the vocabulary to understand all this. I said we have to dig deeper in order to extract that particular tooth. It's painful now. We could have done a better job in the past. It's a bit late. Now we have to extract it. The conceptual pain is a bit unavoidable. Good governance as the governance that facilitates the realization of the morally good states. It's what comes before. Now, back to us. We had a polluted environment. The environment has its own problems. Complexity, coordination, governance of that complexity and coordination. How do we do that? By designing the right infra-ethics. So the real challenge today is no longer good digital innovation. That any kid can do it for you. If you have enough money, you just buy the next startup, trust me. But above all, the good governance of the digital. And this is something that our politicians don't want to hear. They love to work on reactive mode, the crisis, the emergency, the last minute. This has to be done today, and therefore anything else has to happen. But anything else has to wait means we don't have a plan. We're not quite clear where we're going. And therefore, back to the metaphor, our technology is developing too fast. Well, not really. Not if you know where you're going. If you know where you're going, you want to get there as quickly as possible. Well, it's not fast enough. It's because we don't know where we're going that is too fast. It's like driving at night with no lights. Well, that's too fast. On the other hand, if you know where you're going on holiday, you can't wait to reach that particular place, oh, maybe the police will have to chase you because we're going there as quickly as we can. So how do we do all this? Remember, the problem, the complexity, the governance, the infra-ethics. Well, we need, among many other things, a value-driven design for the digital. Now, there are three ways of doing that. You heard some of them. You can have so-called design ethics, that pretty much law, and it tends to be intolerant. You can have ethics by design, nudging, or a pro-ethical design, some tolerant paternalism. A quick overview of each of them. This is Plato, and normally that's a good hero. Well, be careful to what you wish. That passage comes from Republic, and it's when finally the philosopher goes back to the cave and drags at gunpoint, that's what anankaizoito means, gunpoint. Compelled, it's very mild. Violently dragging someone by their hair, that's what it means. And if you read the rest, it's a painful experience. I've been watching Netflix. You're not going to drag me out of this cave, please. I'm enjoying my life here in the darkness. So that is get out of the cave moment where paternalism is violent. It's the kind of sort of paternalism that we impose because we know better. Now, mind the red word and see what happens a few centuries later. Now, the first was getting out of the cave at gunpoint. This is get into the party at gunpoint. Is another great hero. In this case, it's the master, and there is only one master, even if you are in Oxford. The master, the capital M master, that's Jesus. He said, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel. Same word. Isn't that suspicious? Compel them to come in. And that's violent too. So this is paternalism of the worst kind, the violent kind, the intolerant one. The one that does not admit for an argument is what the law does. Now, it might be perfectly fine. After all, it's Plato, it's Jesus, so that's okay. But even Rousseau, now back into a French-speaking, not French philosopher mind, has the same kind of idea. Whoever refuses to obey the general will shall be compelled to do so by the whole body. Remember, how do we solve this problem? Oh, we force them to. We force them to get out of the cave, get into the party, get into society. And mind that that particular word is the same word that translators of the New Testament use in the passage before. It's the same idea. Force. Twist their arm. Make them do so. Well, that is for the strong ethics by law. Or you could be a little bit more gentle. You can nudge people. And I know you know, so I'll be quick on this. Improve decisions by telling them, well, how about going in that direction with a little push as the big elephant to the small elephant? Or finally, you could actually be even more gentle. You could simply say, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, and I'm not going to quietly, gently invite you to do something, but I'm going to force you to make a decision about what you want to do. You will not get your driving license renewed unless you tell me whether you want to be an organ donor or not. Oh, well, that's violent. Mildly. It's forcing me. Yes. What happens if I say no? Nothing. You get your driving license. And if I say yes, you still get your driving license. So what's the difference? That you will have told me. finally. Because that decision has been postponed so many times that finally you have to decide which road will lead to the same conclusion. Force them to choose. Because how many people didn't vote in the United States? How many people stayed home during Brexit? And was it such a good idea not to go to vote last time we were in Italy? Force them to choose. That is a good idea. So in a complex information society, and the web is part of it, we may need to use all kinds of paternalism to shape the topology of the network of possible actions whenever harm will be irreplaceable. If it is too dangerous, force them. Dad, I want to jump out of the third floor window. No, and there is no but, because it's too dangerous. But other things, you can be more gentle. When possible, we should adopt the form of paternalism most consistent with the fostering of freedom and toleration in pro-ethical design. Back to us then. I told you that we have a bit of a polluted web, not irreversibly, not necessarily. The pollution is part of the solution that we have tried several times. Sometimes more communication generates more noise, more communication. The bad generates more bad. I also told you that part of the problem is the complexity lying behind. We need to coordinate efforts in order to make sure that cleaning up is not just a tiny little effort here, a tiny little effort there. So if it is a coordination complexity problem, what kind of solution do we need to find? Well, we need to work on the design of the rules that lead to good behavior, the infra-ethics. And what exactly that means? It means that sometimes we have to force people, everybody, Rousseau-like. Sometimes we can be gentle and nudge them. And sometimes we just have to force them to make up their mind. Either way, some form of paternalism, very, very mild, or increasingly strong, will probably have to be exercised to make sure that the design of the system is such that it leads to a cleaner environment. We don't have much time left. As you know, in another context, this planet is suffering a lot from our lack of care. So at some point, we'll have to decide how much we want to cherish anything goes and how much we want to say, unfortunately, Rousseau is right. We have to be a little bit firm on this. We are informational organisms, or at least that's the way we see today ourselves. We will see ourselves differently in the future. We saw ourselves differently in the past. They're all true pictures. They're different facets of the same complex entity, us. Our lives today and our identities are informationally fragile, very fragile, which means that we must build a healthy web friendly to informational agents, us. There's an opportunity and a necessity here to design our own human project. The web is a key part of that. Is where we come together today in the infosphere. Is essentially the elemental part of that mangrove society that I described at the beginning. We can't simply say, oh, it will take care of itself, or we'll fix it, or some rule will do it, or as long as I don't do it myself, that's okay. We need a coordinated effort. Why? Well, I have said a couple of things about Trump, so let me rectify. It's also a great democracy over there. That particular statement, we the people, it's what is at stake. And the W there could actually be read in a variety of ways. Web the people, so to speak. So we the people are the ones who can actually, as an agent, remember, cope with the coordination complexity of a world that is very more difficult to handle than it was at any time in the past. Coordination is not just emergentism. It's not enough for anyone to do the right thing for the right thing to emerge. Remember, if everyone goes there and pushes the car will not move. We need to coordinate our efforts. We can have more ambitious projects as we the people. The web is there to help us to be more ambitious in our ethical goals. We can do that if we do it together, pushing the car. And we can lower the opportunity cost, meaning that all the things that we are not doing or we cannot do, well, we the people can actually take care of that. So a healthy, good web is the we the people kind of web. But remember, Rousseau, Plato, Jesus. Don't get me wrong. This is not an appeal to goody-goody action by that individual or another. It's not an appeal not to print that particular email. It's an appeal to design the rules of our game such that fragility will be respected and this planet will have a future. So in that sense, we need a human project for our mature information societies. It has to be built not on our strengths, that's modernity, but on our fragilities. Then we will know what to do with AI, with IoT, with the web, and the rest of the technologies. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Oh, maybe just one more. Thank you very much, Professor Floridi, for this very interesting talk. We now have 3 mics for questions, one over here, one over there, which I don't see anymore, and one there. Yeah, there in the center, here and there. And I recall you that this is being filmed and webcasted. So for the people who don't want their image published on the web, we have a 4th microphone up there near the no photo area with the orange lanyard around it. So if you want to ask your question without being filmed, without your image being webcasted, you can also do so. So please feel free to approach the mic, then introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, hello. Thanks for the great talk. Augustin Chintreau from Columbia University. I don't have the rhetorical skills you have. I just want to have just one clarification. You mentioned that affluence in society is a factor. So do you expect that with a feedback effect, as we are running into large problems, we'll become less influent and hence have a better coordinating behavior?
So the point there is that the more affluent a society becomes, the less each of us feels the desperate need to coordinate efforts with the neighbor. Now, it's quite a simple point. The trouble is that this simple point gets connected to another couple of points, meaning that an affluent society is also a society where coordination is more required. Not because we need to help the neighbor to light the fire or find a bit of water, so to speak, but because the problems that we are facing are coordination complex. In other words, they require a lot of us to get together and do the right thing. So whereas in the past, coordination was just between me and my neighbor, and we could just say, I cultivate potatoes, you have a cow, you give me some milk, I'll give you some potatoes. Well, deal. Today, the problems are so much more global that unless the two of us do the same thing and push in the same direction at the same time, the problem will not be solved. And yet, precisely because both of us, shall we say, are okay in their lives, we don't feel that need. We feel, yeah, tomorrow, the day after, someone will take care of it. It's not my problem. It's politics, it's society, Europe, the transatlantic, NATO, you name it. So all of a sudden, something gets postponed when exactly that is the time when it should be felt on our skins. So how much we can do today is extraordinary compared to whatever has been doable for the whole history of humanity. And yet today we see disenchantment, disengagement, lack of interest in politics, precisely when that now we should have more of that. That is a paradox that is not illogical. It's just part of the fact that affluent means I don't think it's going to touch me too closely. I have a job, I have a car, I have a house, etc.
Thank you. We have another question over there. Please introduce yourself.
Henry Story, University of Southampton. So thank you for the very interesting talk. What I hear you say is that you need a political, societal, technical answer to the problem of information pollution in some. And in some sense, you can think of it as how do you get institutions in the web or part of the web? Currently, they're outside of it. They're not when you go to an institution on the web, there's no information to tell you this is a website, this is a university, this is a newspaper, this is a company in Switzerland, this is a company in Italy. You have to guess about the URLs, you have to guess about all kinds of things, and some of us here in the room are experts at that, but most people have no clue. So my suggestion is to find the political willpower together with the browser vendors to allow this information, such as is published on the UK business.gov.uk or companies.gov.uk, to make it readable by web browsers in a distributed way so that they can give this information to people. So this would be a coordinated complexity problem. It's difficult to do this, but it would solve the problem of people being at loss about what kind of company they're dealing with.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a good example of what design can do to us and for us. As an example, there may be others, there are others, but I agree with you that essentially providing better and more refined, finely grained information to the users can help the users to take better decisions, whether that is the example in question or any other similar idea. I mean, we're also talking about a generation that is growing with these tools and is getting kind of used to the sort of common knowledge, common understanding of what's good and what's bad and what kind of website makes sense and what other doesn't. But in that context, I don't want to leave everything. I agree with you, there is no but, there's an and. And I also want to make sure that we don't rely on users 100%. The idea that everything can be resolved by the magic word education, give them more information, better access, more availability, etc. It's a bit of a trick. It means that when something goes wrong, remember, chapter 2, well then whose fault is that? The educated people who either were not educated well enough or didn't know how to use the education, etc. So you have a problem, you find education as a solution, that is also a way of allocating responsibility. And no one loves more education than the people who should be responsible in the first place. So imagine I'm a train company and I say, well, I'm going to educate my customers and make sure that they double check that everything is safe on the train. Empower the customers. So next time something goes wrong, I didn't empower you, you didn't check. Now, change that with some websites and you start getting, well, no one under 13 should be on the social web. Well, let's empower the parents to make sure, no, let's make sure that if anyone under 13 is on their website, it's your fault. Because if anyone is going to buy a drink or tobacco in England underage, it's the fault of the shop. The parents may be scolded, but the shop closed down. So here, what we have is good design to make sure that, yes, education more in terms of capabilities, affordances, but let's make sure that with that doesn't come also a reallocation of responsibility for when things don't go well, because that will be a double trick.
We have a question over there.
Yes. I have a question, Mike Amundsen in the US. So you gave examples of designing choice. You talked about the levels of paternalism, but you've also talked about this notion of coordination and cost. So how I can see how we can design choice. How can we design coordination? Not just lower the cost, but can we design it so that there are other reasons, there are other things that compel me to talk to my neighbor? What are the things that we can tune there besides just choice, if there are?
Thank you. That is a wonderful question. There are a couple of engines that can be exploited when you want to design for coordination. One is the classic, I mentioned it briefly, which is self-interest. Unfortunately, that's normally all we have. So I hope I'm not going to be confusing. You design altruistic coordination by relying on the ultimate engine of self-interest, by showing that by being self-interest, you can also be altruistic. Example, incentives. The government provides some incentives. It's in my self-interest to take advantage of those incentives. The government has a plan. By taking advantage in a self-interest way of those incentives, I end up by coordinating with everybody else. We do the right thing. This incentive, how do we coordinate plastic bags in the UK? Well, we put a tax on it. All of a sudden, boom, we all jump. A self-interest, well, because I don't want to spend the money for the bag, and we are coordinating, everybody happy. The customers, the supermarket, etc. Now, this is one engine, self-interest twisted to make sure that you take it up and you make it work for altruistic behavior. It's a classic, it's modernity. It's the market, it's game theory. We have been pushing that particular strategy for centuries. We pretty know how it works, policy making. Then there's the other one, which has been more, shall we say, oversimplifying the Greek way also. And it's the other great engine, which is hope. Humans have not just self-interest, but they also have hope. And with hope, you can actually run coordination, sometimes even better than self-interest. People will do things for hope that they will not be able to do for self-interest. I might commit suicide hoping for a better world, and that will definitely override any self-interest. So hope overrides self-interest. Self-interest overrides reason. So anyone who runs a campaign on reason has not understood how the world works. So it's reason, self-interest, hope. If you get to hope and you say, the present is rubbish, the future will be better, then you win the campaign. If you start on the reason, self-interest, the present is not so bad, but if you vote for that guy, the future will be horrible, you're dead. That's why we have Macron here, and we don't have Hillary Clinton on the other side. The other way around. You need to promise for hope for the future, and coordination will come. You need to be able to accept that reason will not win the day. It never did. It didn't in Athens when Socrates was there. It did not end well then. Why should it end any better now? So reason, self-interest, hope.
Another question over there.
So you were talking about an individual's an action versus a coordinated action. So, and you also gave an example about a person pushing a car. So I was just a little confused about that example. Like, let's say it's not about pushing a car. Let's say it's about taking out the trash or something, or not spilling it on the ground. So if every individual feels responsible not to do that, so would that lead to a collective effort of everybody not doing it, or at least it'll be, it won't be so dirty, so it'll be relatively clean. So what do you say about that?
Yes, so at some point, you know that sometimes the output of a particular process is irreversible in terms of understanding what generated the output. So suppose we are in a clean environment. Did we reach that clean environment by having every single individual doing the right thing, or by having a whole society coordinated so that the society producer, you can't tell. It's a clean environment. So the idea that we're going to reach the right outcome by having everybody doing the right thing is just another way of saying we coordinated. Well, but there was no coordination. It just happened that everybody did the right thing. Well, in modernity, there was a debate, Leibniz time, and it was about causality. And some people said, no, there's a causal chain here. And some other people, like Leibniz, would say, no. It's just the best possible coordination without any causal link. This clock and this clock give the same time, but they have no causal connection. They just give the same time. So these people and these people, they do the right thing, there's no coordination, and yet the outcome, yes, it's possible. Now, the perfect outcome may come in different ways. All I'm arguing here is that we shouldn't bank on the best scenario, namely, everybody does the right thing. Because the best scenario, they take care of themselves. You always work on the worst scenario, namely, no one is going to do it unless we coordinate it. And that's what I'm sort of arguing. So I agree with you. I'm just talking about the B scenario, the worst scenario, where coordination is necessary. In theory, we could all of a sudden decide walking around, and then, boom, everybody go and push the car. It's not going to happen, is it? Unless someone say, hey, you, 1, 2, 3, push. That's going to happen. The difference, the car moves. So both scenarios are possible.
Thank you.
Another question over here.
In the same spirit of the previous question, I think one of the main problems is human population in the world. And in fact, we see that there are several areas in the world that the population is decreasing. One is in Europe and the other is in China. One is just everyone's doing it by himself, and the other by increasing coordination. And in fact, one way to look on that fact is just that people understand that the coordination is very complex, and they want to reduce the problem. So instead of solving the problem, they just make few people, and they reduce the complexity of coordination.
Thank you. I think I take that more as a comment. Thank you.
I think you were there. Yeah.
Okay. To have the ability to compel people to do things, you need some sort of international governance, or which organization do you see as putting the regulations in place and then enforcing them? There is no such organization right now.
Thank you. So here we have some classic recipes and some new ones. The classic work up to a certain point. National states and supranational organizations. Quick comment on this. Do not think for a moment that national states are not absolutely necessary. They're even more necessary today than ever before. It's just they become increasingly insufficient, and people get confused. Oh, it's insufficient, therefore it's not necessary. What? It's increasingly more necessary to have France, Germany, Italy doing the right thing. Of course, these are the muscles that we need there. Sufficient? Absolutely not. We need so much more. That's why we need Europe. And no one will ever convince me that no matter how much Europe stinks, it's a bad idea. It does not work, yes. It's revolt, yes. It's the only way forward, absolutely. Because we need that coordination, and only those shoulders will carry the day. So that's the first thing, not classic solutions. But we also have a daring solution, which I'm not sure everybody will be happy about. These new agents are also called multinationals. And from modernity, we have kept them outside the political room, in the corridor, lobbying. And I don't think it's a good idea. I would like to see them in the room, transparently voting responsibly for what is going to happen. Because if you can take, say, Apple, Amazon, the usual, the Google, the Facebook of the world, the Microsoft, the IBM, the big sort of digital companies joining us in trying to do the right thing with the web, for example, as today, what do you think is going to happen with that kind of force behind us? Now, the trouble is that we think that this is a conflict. It's a conflict between society and business, one against the other. It is not. We have other forces to fight. Pollution on the environment, pollution on the web, pollution of politics in many countries. So those are the real enemies. When we fight each other within the same kind of set of values, within more or less the kind of decency that is still out there, and I'm talking even about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, yeah, that's already something that it's still okay-ish compared to all the other rubbish that we have. We can bring them on board, make sure that they play good corporate citizenship, and then we have a better chance to win.
We have time for maybe last quick questions over there.
Yeah, hi. Ivan Brugere, University of Illinois, Chicago. I wanted to push back a little bit on your premise, basically, that there's a lot of pollution on the web, and this may be a bad thing. Actually, I think that pollution on the web is indicator of any healthy web, because without that, if I can't, for example, publish on the web that Hillary Clinton gave birth to an alien baby, I don't think it's a free web. And so what do you say if I want to be able to do whatever I want on the web, and and that you may not necessarily be able to impose a polite society on the web, that people may be able to be intolerant or bigoted or so on, if they want to, as they would be in their private lives.
Yes, so let's see if I can clarify a point. There's freedom at the individual level that affects only the individual. If I want to smoke whatever I want to smoke in my house, it's entirely my own business. If I want to get drunk 24/7 in my house, it's entirely my own business. And no one, anywhere, should have a word about it. But if I drink and drive, well, that's everybody's business. Because I might kill someone while driving, and it's no longer my freedom. Surely I should be able to drink as much as I want. So if anyone wants to have an intranet where all the crap in the world flies, feel free. You put it everywhere, it's affecting me. I'm actually being driven over by that rubbish. That I don't think is very socially acceptable. There has to be a bit of a balance here. In the same way as I can go and run naked in my house, but not in a public space. So this free-for-all, no matter what, forget about the consequences, we need to grow up. It's a social environment. It's an infosphere for everybody. It's a park where everybody is. Kids, anyone else. Thank you. So this idea that you just go around with a little hat and it's the free society, it's the past. It was a good moment. It's way gone. We have grown up. We're no longer teenagers. We're grown-ups. And as grown-up, we know our responsibilities, and when it's okay, and trust me, I'm a ferocious defender of individual freedoms, about abortion, about divorce, you name it. I want to be able to marry whoever the heck I want, my dog included, because it's about me. But when it comes to social stuff, well, no, wait a moment, because I'm going to affect the neighbor. That coordination, I want to see it in place. And the web is for everybody. Everybody. It's not just the freedom of speech or something. For that, I think we need some rules. Sorry.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.